Hello, YouTube. Welcome to my channel, Marriage, Politics, and Sports. Today, I'll be talking about the Supreme Court overturning affirmative action. This stems from a discrimination suit against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, led by Kenny Zhu, board member of Students for Fair Admission and director of Color Us United. As a brief background into affirmative action, according to the Smithsonian Magazine in 2022, affirmative action as a term was coined in 1935 as part of the Wagner Act, a federal law that gave workers the right to form unions and join unions. But John F. Kennedy was the first president to link the term specifically with a policy meant to advance racial equality. As with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the liberal left panic over this decision is already at an extreme. And it's unclear, how the ruling will set precedents across the country. So in fact, affirmative action has already been largely overturned in most states already, or in plenty of states already. Let's put it that way. Further, the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action were not Black people or people of color. It was white women. They grifted affirmative action away from everybody else. Now, in whose dream could white women be a minority in the United States? They're the majority of people here. So it was a grift to begin with, and so I'll link a couple of articles talking about how white women benefited from affirmative action more than anybody else. I mean, by far, absolutely by far. Okay, so, this whole notion that Black people getting up and talking about affirmative action like it's been effective for us anywhere in the last 20 years is kind of ridiculous. Okay, so from my vantage point, the liberal left as one less controlling fear-based weapon in their arsenal to hurl at Black people. This victimization of affirmative action can't be used any longer because it's going away. So the use of victimization as a constant and steady reminder that because of our skin color, we are intellectually inferior to our counterparts and thus cannot compete based on merit. And it's just absolute horseshit, you know. So in recent years, Black women have debunked this theory because they're pretty much the most enrolled in college than almost anybody else. And that's certainly not racial quotas. I mean, they're busting. Those are not quotas. They're just going to college. And universities are accepting them and they're paying big money and they're getting into a tremendous amount of debt over it. Okay, so let's let's state up front, and let me state up front that I applaud this decision. Let's just get rid of it because it's no use to Black people anymore. It hasn't been for years, and not that I think there's no racial discrimination, but we could focus on other things as opposed to admission to college. I mean, people are getting into college if they want to go. You might not be able to get into the best school or Harvard or whatever, but there's thousands of universities that will accept you. And based on the way your college education is going, as long as you can prove that you can go through a curriculum, you can still, if you have the right curriculum, you can find a job and you can, feed your family. That's what I'm saying. So, so listen, so let's not. Yeah, here's another thing about major universities. Most universities are liberal leaning. They crave diversity. So even if they can't use race as a discriminator, they'll find something else to use. Just think about it. Let me cue you this example. You get two applicants, right? One from an affluent, background. He's an A student. He has great SAT scores. And then you get another applicant from the deepest, darkest bowels of Chicago, where people are dying every day, or the Appalachian Mountains, where there's just all kinds of bad, poor people out there. But they have an A student there, and great SAT scores. The school may consider choosing the person whose environment weighs more. Uh, you know, their environmental hardship weighs more on them to achieve that A and to achieve those SAT scores, as opposed to choosing the affluent person with an A, right? Because they had all the basic things that they should be a great student. But here's a person who overcame adversity. Now, they could pick that student and it would have nothing to do with race because both based on merit. But this guy worked against all odds to get to where he's at. The other guy was fed a silver spoon in his mouth. Now, listen, it's not like it's 100% zero sum game because that affluent A student will actually find plenty of other universities to go to. So I think we make too much of this anyhow. So I have uh so they have this saying or this term called chicken soup for the soul, which kind of means it's a cure for a variety of illnesses or other problems. For Black Americans, the illness is the bigotry of low expectations and an attitude that feeds victimization. So, this ruling is essentially chicken soup for our soul. Let's get rid of this shit and let's kind of move on. I got like four clips I want to show you. The first one is from a content creator, and all the content creators' links will be in the description. And it's a fair use thing. And this gentleman, Eblack, he's thinking that we're going to be really harmed by this decision. I disagree, but I want to let him have a voice. The next one is by this guy named Eric July, and he's the founder of the Rippaverse, and I think he's a libertarian. And he speaks. He never thought this was a good idea. The next one is by Anton Daniels, and most of you already know Anton Daniels, a great content creator, crazy guy, rich dude, but he also didn't think this was a great idea. He didn't, he's not for affirmative action either. And finally, the Black conservative perspective, where this guy actually has a clip of Kenny Zoo being interviewed by a Black liberal female. And it's an interesting interview, and he just debunks everything she has to say. And so I'm gonna play those things, and let's just get to it. So I'm gonna stop sharing here, uh, and just cue those up. So bear with me for a second. All right. Bear with me. We're gonna cue those up. All right.
Several landmark federal court cases. The first case was filed against University of Washington Law School by a white student who was rejected and claimed the university prioritized less qualified students of color. Similar lawsuits filed by white students followed in 1978, 2003, and 2016, resulting in the Supreme Court ruling, which upholds that race can be kept as one of many factors, but not used as a quota system.
When all things being considered are equal, affirmative action is used as a tiebreaker.
But some Asian American students don't see it that way.
Even the fact
This
that
gentleman, E
Asian
Black,
American
is
students
a
are applying to these
content
universities,
creator, and he's
and there's a
thinking this
slight
is going to be
doubt in
very
my head that
detrimental to
maybe my
us.
race might be used against
So I
me
got a
because
couple of clips
I
of
didn't
his
work hard enough.
post, and he's going to use some
Just even that
statistics
thought
next.
being there is
And it
dangerous.
kind of, I think,
Michael was
reinforces the fact
rejected
that
from
we
his
really
top
don't
choice
need affirmative action.
universities, but he was accepted to two Ivy League schools. However, he chose to attend Williams College for undergrad instead.
And that's me and my parents.
Michael believed his race may have been used against his application and wrote to three universities asking how race was used in admissions. He ultimately filed a formal complaint to the Department of Education when he didn't receive an answer addressing his question.
I found here that most of what they stated here was that they don't disadvantage Asian American students in their compliance, but they didn't really answer my question here.
In a statement to CNBC, Yale says its admissions practices adhere to Supreme Court precedent, and Yale College will continue to consider race and ethnicity as one part of its careful whole person review of applications. Yale will never waver in its commitment to assembling a diverse student body.
In my complaint, I brought up that one of my main concerns was that is the fact that I am Asian American something that actually benefits me or something that actually disadvantages me? my dad ended up joining this fight as well. So my dad and a bunch of other leaders in the Asian American community formed the Asian American Coalition of Education. With that,
Let me stop that right there. So you see the plight of the Asian American, and I'm gonna jump ahead to another point in this video where my man Eblacks shows some statistics, and let's just go from there.
So the affirmative action ruling starts with colleges and will move to businesses, housing, and contracts. Now, that's very interesting. That is very interesting because little do people know that for a large part of this country, student, in terms of affirmative action, has actually been banned. And let me take this chat down. If you look at the yellow states, California, Oregon, Idaho, Arizona, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Florida, I'm guessing that's New Hampshire, and I'm going to fail this one. Minnesota?
Listen closely, he has it backwards.
Well, yes, that's Minnesota. Affirmative action is actually illegal. I'm sorry. I when I wrote this, when I did this chart, it's reversed. The yellows are actually illegal. It says here on the chart is illegal, but I reversed it. So, you know, the fact that California is already banned it, you know, this is not a liberal talking point or a conservative talking point. Florida has banned it. It's not a liberal or a conservative talking point. So this has already been a fact of American history. So I want to make sure that we're not just, if you're thinking about this conversation, you're not just saying, well, California.
Well, he just showed a couple of charts where affirmative action has already been banned. And in those same places where he said it been banned, like Florida, there's no overriding complaints of minorities or blacks or people of color getting into colleges. You see what I'm saying? So he's already proven the fact that this ruling is not going to be as impactful as people think. You know, it really isn't.
They let all the black people in. No, they've already banned it. They've been banned it. This has been banned since 1996. And we'll kind of go over the effects of that. You know, when you talk about the enrollments, what was the effects of the enrollment in regards to California doing that?
So in this next chart, he's going to show when affirmative action was applied and when it was taken away. And if you look at the numbers, you know, you'll see how close the numbers are. And let him explain it. But I'm just thinking that
So
this
I have
argument is
another
not
stat
that
that I'm gonna
strong when
show.
we look at this stat.
Here.
And it's an old stat, by the way. If you look at the
This
number, you
tab.
look at it, it's like in the 80s, 90s. He doesn't have the updated information.
So if you look at this kind of chart,
well, this one might be in 2022.
this
I think.
says the top 12 public school average black graduation rates in the country, most selective public universities. You know, the school type is on the top row says, or should I say, the African American black graduation rate and the average black to white graduation gap. If you look at the top 20, the top 12 public universities with affirmative action, they graduate at an 87 percentile. There's only a gap of 6%. If you look at the top 12 universities without affirmative action, there's only a 78% graduation rate. And the gap between black and white graduation is 10%. So these are real life stories that you can see and stats that you can see can help you understand what are the effects of affirmative action. What's going to happen to these kids? What are going to happen to states that say, you know what? We don't want affirmative action. And
Again, I don't look at that as the kind of direct correlation that he's trying to make, that affirmative action made the difference in graduation rates. I think that's a leap, right? I mean, you could just trying to connect those two things, right? When was the time period when affirmative action was in place and when it wasn't, and the kind of quality of the students based on the demographics who actually applied to school. Maybe the folks who went to school earlier graduated at a higher rate because they were more motivated. And it wasn't just because of affirmative action. It could have just been because they were a better crop of students. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, so he's just using statistics to kind of fit his meaning, because when I look at 87% versus 78%, yeah, it's a statistically significant difference. But it wasn't like, the fall off went under 50% or something. You know what I'm saying? So I'm trying to figure out what kind of real thing is he kind of talking about. So that's enough of that one. I'm gonna get on to the next thing. I'm gonna stop sharing him, and we're gonna go to the next video and see what we can find from a guy named Eric July, and he's against affirmative action big time. I mean, he doesn't. All right, so without further ado, let's go and hear what my man has to say.
Has been. People
they're gonna have some commercials every so often. I can't stand this thing, but if you're gonna use it, you're gonna have to live with that. Okay, so let's go. He got 2 commercials in a row, and his content is popular, so I know they're gonna.
People will, of course, bring up, and the great Walter E. Williams, rest in peace. He's talked about this as well. Where you look at that era where a lot of these laws sort of stem from, and that era with the 50s and the 60s, in America, where you had people that were being, by law, and that's the part that people lose out on, they lose sight of. Like, I always refer to Plessy versus Ferguson as the Supreme Court case and how rotten that was, where what happened was you had a boxcar company, Louisiana, it was the Louisiana Separate Boxcar Act, I think was the actual name of it. And there's a part of history, a lot of y'all have heard about that Supreme Court case, and there's a part in history. This is more speaking to the discrimination aspect, and I'll get to that here in a bit. But folks completely misunderstand what happened with that. And they just look at it like, well, the government had, forced this and forced that, which it really wasn't. It was far more than that. What actually happened with the Louisiana Separate Boxcar Act is that it forced boxcar companies to separate the colored folk from the white folk. And instead of allowing them to make that decision for themselves, and this happened all across the South, the state was forcing people to segregate. Okay. They were forcing them to do it. Jim Crow laws, you had slave codes, black codes, the Jim Crow laws. They all did that, where the state were forcing people to discriminate. Okay. And that's the part that got lost, that people lose sight of with the Plessy versus Ferguson case, because the actual boxcar company that was in contention there was against the law, mainly for economic reason. Money's green, y'all. And the same could be said back then. When folks didn't want to separate them, yes, there were racist business owners, of course, but there were also guys that were legally unable to integrate, or less integrate, just let whoever had the money sit in the damn boxcar. They would not allow them to do that because there was laws preventing them from doing so. And that's the part that, when it comes to history, folks, they forget that part. They don't understand what a Jim Crow law, they don't understand what those were. So the solution was not affirmative action. It was not the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Those were not the solutions. The solutions were simple: get rid of the laws. These people have God-given individual rights. Let the market adjust where it may. That's not what happened, though. And now we still have these very archaic laws that shouldn't have been implemented in the first place. And now when it's a system that's less based on merit, it's more based on quota. So you have things where people need to be competitive, things where we need innovation, we need the better people for those jobs to be filling those. well, you got to have this certain number of this type of person. And when it comes to the anti-discrimination laws, these laws have often been used to invade because they in themselves are anti-private property rights laws. So if you go to cases like Civil Rights Acts that are implemented in states like Oregon, this is why a Christian baker is able to be sued by some idiotic lesbian couple because they want to force him to make a cake. Now, again, that's corny and that's for losers. Begging to be accepted by people that don't like you is loser shit. I'm just gonna be completely honest. I made this point a million times, right? Yes, I would rather. It's funny. You say, well, these leftists think they got gotchas, right? They'll say, well, would you be okay if someone that didn't want to serve the black people were allowed to do that? Yes. Why in the fuck would I want to give my money to someone that hates me? See, this is what
Let me stop it right there. He's absolutely right. The one thing I can't stand is when I see people complain that they go to a store, they get followed, they get treated like shit, and they get treated poorly, but they still buy the item. It's the most idiotic thing. You don't prove to somebody who hates you and despises you that you have a right to spend money in their store and fill their pockets of hatred. You take your money and you go home. You go to another store. You don't feed the hand that hates you. It's the most ridiculous and stupid thing that people can ever do. Right? So you turn me off once in your establishment, I'm never going back. And everybody who I know, I'ma tell, don't go there because of A, B, C, and D. As each one teach one, I will spread the news that your establishment is off limits. You treat me bad just once. So I mean, listen, this is how the power of your economics matters, you know. And so even though it kind of sounds like it's not affirmative action or part of this, it's just the horrors of the same coin. Anyway, so I got another video I'm gonna share. I'm gonna stop sharing this one, and I'm gonna go to brother Anton Daniels and go to his I'm gonna share his chart, his little piece, which is interesting because he always has a great take on things. Uh, and here it goes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Taking a live look at the U.S. Supreme Court, where less than 30 minutes ago, justices issued their ruling that colleges and universities must stop
There might be
considering
some
race in
commercials here too, but
applications,
fair use,
striking
fair
down
use.
affirmative action in the college admissions process. Now, this actually overturns an earlier 2003 ruling that found that race considerations were constitutional.
Now, let's stop there before we get into it. Again, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action, which has been in existence since I was born, at least. And they struck down affirmative action. And what affirmative action did for colleges and universities basically was it basically gave preferential treatment to people of color. And if you were a double minority, if you're a woman, if you're a black woman, and all of this other type of stuff, I think even white women were considered because they were considered a minority also. But what it did was it allowed for race to be a consideration as far as giving a leg up, which in my opinion is a form of reparations, but we're going to get into that in a minute. It gave a leg up to people that were of a different race in a proposed system, because I had this conversation with a guy last night that actually dipped out when I started asking the hard questions. It gives preferential treatment to a group of people based off of the idea that they have a lower hand in our system as far as race. So when I hear people have a conversation and they say, well, the system was set up against us, I'm going to tell you how the system was really set up against you by even allowing for affirmative action to exist in the first place. But let me play the rest of this.
Prem 2's Nicole Hernandez live outside of the federal courthouse in Spokane to break down what we know right now about this case. Good morning, Nicole.
Good morning, Tim Channing. So we are still going through that majority opinion right now, but here's what we know so far. Like you guys mentioned, the Supreme Court.
Shout out to Jeremy. I'm going to read that super chat shortly.
saying that the race-based admissions policies through Harvard and the University of North Carolina are unconstitutional. There is a lot in this opinion, of course, but the court found that the admissions program violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. That clause essentially says all people must be seen as equal in the eyes of the law. The court ruled 6-3 in this case, with the court's 3 liberal justices.
Women love a guy that takes good care of his face. If you need some
Did I
help in
get
that
these
department,
commercials? I'm
Lumen has
sorry
you
about
covered.
Dissenting the decision, and Chief Justice John Roberts authored the majority here. Roberts said, quote, that for too long universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges vested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin.
Let's stop there. Let's read that again, because I don't want y'all to skip past this. For too long, universities have concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges vested, meaning how you're able to overcome and whether or not you're able to succeed based off of the fact that you are good enough, not based off of your skin. Skills built, meaning this is something that has to be put in you, and then you have to continue to manifest your greatness based off of how much work you put in. Or lessons learned, meaning that you're making the adjustment, you're pivoting, you're failing forward, you're continuing to evolve, and then as a result, you're building yourself up to be a better version of yourself, to be able to compete in a global society, which is what we should be anyway, right? Black people, in a lot of instances, they look at it based off of what's going on in their hood and how they feel. Other countries are competing based off of global dominance. And so when you think that your enemy is the person that's standing next to you that may have a different skin color than you, what you don't understand is that we're in a class war, and we're on a war for our lives based off of how you're supposed to compete on a global scale, not how you're supposed to compete in your own hood. He said, but it's instead the color of your skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Let me continue.
Now, I'm going to stop it there. I mean, because if you need to, just go back and read this over and over again. And every person who overcome the environment to succeed did exactly this. You learned some lessons. You bested your challenges. You ignored those guys in your hood who went down the wrong path. You know, you looked at a bigger picture for success, or you put in that your future had to be bigger than what was around you. And then the way you did that, or the way I did it, and I think some other people said, is the things that I saw when I was a adolescent and a teenager growing up. I vowed that if I ever had a family, my kids would never, ever see that kind of life. They will never be around that as part of their environment. It will be up to me to take them out of that environment and put them somewhere else. And the only way I could do that was not look at myself as a victim. It's no matter what the oppression was, one door's closed, we opened another door. And that door had to be sufficient enough to get you to somewhere in the atmosphere of your dreams. And that's what has to happen. You know, so this whole thing of just, oh, woe is me, the Democratic Liberal Party says, listen, you can't exist unless we help you. Let me change your diaper. Let me pamper you. You know, let's make sure you have the dusting and oil on your genitals so they don't get, chafed. You know, we don't need that. We don't. We just need to just pull ourselves mentally out of the mix that we're in and do better, where we can. Just better than you did the day before. So this is Anton. This is what he said. So I'm going to share one more video with you from a real Black conservative who has a perspective. And so I'm going to stop sharing this. And we're going to just, kind of finish this. So this is the last video that I'm going to share. And we'll just take it from there. So, and there's a couple of places in here that I'm go to. And I think there's some interesting stuff there. All right, let's go.
And particularly the Asian kids in this country have been dominated. But this is the best news for Black Americans. It can be. It can be.
Why?
If we allow it, because maybe now we will demand strong educations for our kids beginning in kindergarten. So this kind of thing becomes a moot point. We should never even have to consider things like this if it wasn't for the bigotry of low expectations, mostly by liberal cities that do not think highly of Black people. Oh, they like us, but they don't think we're smart. And so the Faustian deal has always been, we'll give you a watered down education. Your kids will graduate 12th grade with an 8th grade reading level, but we'll make it up to you. We'll give you fair housing. We'll give you food stamps. We'll find a way to make it up. We'll push affirmative action. We'll get you into jobs that you may not necessarily be qualified for. That's the Faustian deal. It's time to end the Faustian deal. I got a lot more.
So let me end that right there. I agree with him 100%. You know, we need to stop making deals that belittle us as people. You know, so this affirmative action can only, Supreme Court decision can only go to help us in the future.
Advocates against affirmative action. He's also a member of the board for.
It's great.
I'm going to bring in now Kenny Hsu, president of Color Us United, a group that advocates against affirmative action. He's also a member of the board for Students for Fair Admissions. That's the group that brought this case against Harvard and the University of North Carolina. Kenny, thank you for joining us. So today's ruling obviously is one that you were hoping for, arguing that the rules in place that support affirmative action were unfair to Asian Americans. So from a practical perspective, how does today's decision help Asian American students looking to get into elite colleges?
Affirmative action.
I just want to say I'm ecstatic about this decision. It means that Asian Americans can finally get treated on their merits. Guys, we know why Asian Americans should get into Harvard at disproportionate rates. It's because they study twice as many hours as the average American.
Facts. Facts. That's all you need to hear right now. And this is why I tell the woke revolutionaries that are so upset about this, work harder, right? If you want to get into these elite schools, then you need to outwork the other students that are working hard, right? Outwork them, study harder, do more, right? That is how you respond to this. What you don't do is boohoo, whine, and complain and cry because you can't be racist against people who worked harder than you, right? Who earned it more than you did. It's really that simple.
It's not because of their race. It's because of their culture. It's because of their family values.
Facts. And this is why I say that the real solution to this is culture. It's family values. That's the real solution. Put the responsibility back on the parents in regards to the outcomes of children, because good culture, strong family values, valuing education can and will produce elite students.
Academic excellence, that should be prioritized. Those should be the values that schools like Harvard and Chapel Hill, supposedly elite schools and academic programs, should be valuing in an applicant, not race.
So you've argued also that Harvard and other colleges should get rid of their legacy admissions, which also gives people points for having a parent that went to that school. That's not happening here. I wonder why not challenge that, which is also presumptively an obstacle for Asian Americans being treated fairly in the admissions process.
Well, I hope you followed the case, but Students for Fair Admissions has challenged legacy admissions repeatedly over and over again. In fact, we argued that the way that Harvard could implement some of their diversity policies without discriminating against Asian Americans is to get rid of legacy admissions, which, as you know, disproportionately privilege white applicants. In fact, 33% of Harvard students who are white are legacy, and they have a 5 times more likely chance of getting in if you are legacy. So you really want to ensure diversity in admissions, get rid of legacy admissions.
You know, it's funny because she tried to get them with a gotcha. Well, why don't you guys fight against legacy admissions? That overwhelmingly benefits whites and it's against Asians, right? This is what they say, okay? Because, you know, they're salty that legacy admissions are still out. And look, here's the thing about legacy admissions. I'm against that as well, too. But at the same time, you know how you fight that? It's the same thing. Culture, academic excellence. Because if you get into these schools, you achieve, and then, you know, you give money back to the school, and then all of a sudden you benefit from legacy admissions. But again, regardless, you know, I would rather see legacy admissions go away, or they have a lot less emphasis on that, because you really shouldn't be able to just buy your way into a school. Okay, if your family's rich, they donate to the school or whatever, you get in. Or if your family went to the school and now all of a sudden all the kids get into the school because the family went to school. Nah, that's also not necessarily a merit-based thing. Okay, so again,
I would lean towards getting rid of legacy admissions as well too. But again, this guy is fighting against that. He's not a hypocrite on this issue. He's fighting against that as well too.
You heard today President Biden expressing some concerns over socioeconomic factors and inequality being made worse given this decision. He also presented what he called basically a way forward. I wonder if you take race out of the picture and you do what the president is suggesting, taking socioeconomic status into consideration, do you think that that would be fair to Asian American students as well?
No, I don't. I think that admissions should be only based on merit. And the reason why is because you can't, why are we asking a university to calculate somebody's level of adversity? I think that that sets a very bad precedent.
Facts. Facts. They have an adversity calculator, right? A victimhood calculator. How victimized this person? Okay. You're not a victim enough. Therefore, you have less of a chance of getting into our school. It's just silly. It's extremely silly. And they do it based off race. Again, in my opinion, I think that's racist. I think it's racist to assume that somebody had it hard in life just because they're black or just because they're a woman, okay, as well too, because that's also a factor as well too, right? Being a woman also is supposed to be a disadvantage. It's just amazing how that works. It doesn't make any sense. This is not what we should be doing in a society in which we value meritocracy, which we should. That's exactly what we should be doing.
For anybody trying to get into college, we should be treated on the basis of our merits. We should be treated on the basis of how hard we work, our study, our SAT scores, our grades. A name-blind, race-blind process is what I would advocate for as president of Colors United.
Kenny, can I ask you though? I mean, colleges, obviously they care about grades and SAT scores, but they also are filling universities of people, human beings who have other factors that they bring to the table. Why is it not okay for them to consider those things?
I'm saying if you're going to consider those things, you should consider them without respect to race.
Sure.
So as you know, a lot of Asian Americans.
I think that that's exactly right. But socioeconomic status doesn't. If you take race out of it, let's call it socioeconomic status, where whether or not they grew up wealthy or poor, is that not something that colleges might have an interest in considering?
The reason why you shouldn't consider that is because you should consider the success of an applicant. Because of affirmative action, Black Americans graduate from law school at the bottom 25% of their classes, largely speaking. And we don't want that. We want Black students to succeed. We want every student to succeed, low-income students to succeed. But you have to put them in scenarios, in places where they're likely to succeed. And lowering your standard to admit somebody of a socioeconomic status or race would not help them do that. In fact, it would harm their graduation rate and excellence.
Facts. And it creates a stigma against them as well, too. It creates a stigma against Black people who do get into these positions because people are going to say, well, are you affirmative action hire? Are you a doctor only because they lower your standards? And even if, again, you are from a lower socioeconomic status, the solution to helping those students is not to lower the standards for them, but to make sure that they have the resources necessary to succeed despite their situation. Which, I mean, in my opinion, school choice, right? School choice would be a policy that would help solve that problem. But again, Democrats are against that. They're against helping people of lower economic status get access to elite schools before they even go to college, right? Because if they have access to elite schools and resources before they go to college, then that would probably make them more equipped to get into these elite universities. It's kind of funny how that works.
Well, as the case also points out, the standard isn't necessarily lowered because students are all admitted. The question is whether race can be an added consideration, a tipping point.
No, the standard is lowered. The standard is lowered. The standard is lowered as student permit admissions data shows. An Asian has to score 273 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a Black person. So the standard is lowered for Black Americans.
Kenny Xu, thank you for your perspective. We really appreciate you joining us today.
She wanted to. She really wanted to counter him, but she couldn't. She had nothing.
I'm going to stop it right there. So listen, we're seeing the guy who actually bought the suit. And, even whether you're Asian American or not, it's not Asian against Black. You have to be able to hear what he's saying, that folks who achieve a certain level of academics should not be discriminated just to take care of adding minorities or people of color or black folks to the curriculum. There's got to be some other way to do that, and we've already solved that. Because the truth of the matter is, when was the last time we heard anybody said that they can't go ahead and spend $100,000 to go to college from the minority community? If you could borrow the money, you can go to college. So this is like a moot point, right? If Harvard fills their ranks with Asians, they're going to have an issue with that themselves. That has nothing to do with us, right? If they're going to be the university that puts a whole bunch of Asians in there because these guys have higher SAT scores and they got tiger moms who make sure they do their homework, hey, guess what? We need to get some more tiger moms in the black community as opposed to single mothers worrying about who their next boyfriend is, right? And, not all of them, but enough of them, right? Have other priorities than just raising good kids. Because guess what? In those Asian communities, they got a 2-parent household and they're focused on the right things, right? So it's cultural. Asians, Jews, some Hispanic community, everybody still understands the benefits of having a full family so the kids could prosper, except black people, right? We got this stupid ass gender war going on and our kids are suffering, so there you have it. So that you can't take that. They can't be at the top. Only a select few can see past their stupidity of their parents and succeed the way they need to succeed so they could compete on a world stage, right? So that's the connection between the politics of this affirmative action and the relationships between the people who are supposed to prepare their children for the future. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing this and go back to my little closing remarks, and we'll just go from there. And I'm not going to be too much longer, probably longer than I should have been already. So the only thing I can say is that so in closing, listen, let me repeat about this. Affirmative action has been primarily for white women for almost the last 30 years. They hijacked the movement, they took it over, and they prospered because of affirmative action. It's really disingenuous to have black people being the people talking and lamenting that affirmative action is over, since we stopped benefiting from it for over a decade. Right? Every black person, who's really succeeded in anything through college, through getting a job and all that, trust me, you didn't do it because somebody has affirmative action, because they were applying it to the white woman next to you. Right? So, listen, you need to take credit for your accomplishments. And it wasn't just affirmative action. I heard that Joy Reid went on TV. She's got a whole network. She's on national TV, and she says she's there because of affirmative action. She's pandering. She's full of shit. I don't agree with her. There had to be something about her, because even if you get into school or if you get a promotion or if you still have to do the work. And if your work is not up to par, they will get rid of you. Affirmative action is not going to save you. So I'm not a big Joy Reid fan. I don't watch her, but she's where she is based on merit. And for her to prove a stupid liberal talking point to belittle where she's at, it's really shameful. I mean, it's actually shameful, and I'm disappointed that she would say something like that, because that doesn't do anybody any good. So listen, I'm gonna end this here. This marriage, politics, and sports. They call me Art Payne on these airways. Listen, please like, share, subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna come with some more content. Listen, the Supreme Court's been busy. A lot of people don't realize that they refuse to hear overturning some Jim Crow laws in Mississippi just recently, so they wouldn't even hear the case. They shot down the gay couple who wanted to force a store owner to make them a gay cake. They shot that down. And they also, there's another thing that they shot down. Man, I can't remember off the top of my head, and I should have been prepared. But anyway, you go look it up. So the Supreme Court's been busy. Now, affirmative action is getting the most press, but it ain't the only thing that they're doing. It's not the only thing that they're doing. So, they shot down Biden's student loan program. And that's a whole nother can of worms. I'm going to come up with something on that because I think that we need to go after the lenders, right? I think there should be a sliding scale of how much money they can loan somebody based on the curriculum that those people take. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to put out a video on that. So with that, over and out. I'm finished. Arpanian over and out. Later.